The moment Captain Elias Kane pushed open the vault door to Blackridge's restricted weapons bay, he expected silence. What he got instead was the metallic click of a .50 caliber rifle being stripped apart by hands that shouldn't exist. A woman in civilian clothes, auburn hair, ivory blouse, zero hesitation, sat calmly at the steel workbench under cold fluorescent light, her fingers moving across the weapon like a surgeon mid-operation. No alarms, no breach protocols, just her. And the rifle. The one tied to 73 confirmed kills at distances that defied physics. She didn't look up when he entered, didn't flinch when he barked her name, his name, before he'd ever given it. That's when Elias realized he wasn't dealing with an intruder. He was standing in front of a ghost the military pretended didn't exist. Stay with me until the very end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this one travels. The air inside Black Ridge Tactical Center tasted like gun oil and cold metal. It always did. Elias had spent 15 years walking these corridors, learning every shadow, every hum of the ventilation system, every rhythm of boots on concrete. This place was a fortress buried in the Nevada desert, 30 miles from anything resembling civilization. No tourists, no press, no accidents, just operators, intel analysts, and the kind of hardware that didn't make it onto inventory sheets. He'd been headed to the armory to sign off on routine maintenance logs. Boring work, the kind that kept the gears turning between the missions that mattered. His mind had been elsewhere. A phone call from his ex-wife, his daughter's upcoming birthday. The usual debris of a life spent choosing duty over everything else. Then he saw the light. Weapons Bay 4 wasn't supposed to be active. The schedule showed it locked down until Tuesday. Elias paused mid-stride, instinct kicking in before thought. His hand moved to his sidearm, a Sig Sauer M18 he'd carried through 2 deployments and more close calls than he cared to count. The badge reader blinked green when he swiped his card. The reinforced door hissed open on hydraulic hinges. And there she was. Sitting on a rolling stool in the center of the room, framed by rows of weapon racks and steel lockers, was a woman who had absolutely no business being there. She was maybe 35, maybe older, hard to tell. Auburn hair pulled back in a low ponytail, plain ivory blouse with the sleeves rolled to her elbows, dark jeans, no uniform, no badge lanyard, no visible ID. Her hands moved with surgical precision across the disassembled pieces of a Barrett M107A1, one of the most lethal long-range rifles the U.S. military had ever fielded. Elias felt his pulse spike. Step away from the weapon. His voice came out flat, controlled, the tone of a man who'd given 1,000 orders and expected them followed. Hands where I can see them. She didn't move. Not at first. Her fingers continued tracing the edge of the rifle's barrel, inspecting it under the harsh overhead lights like she was reading Braille. Then, slowly, too slowly, she set down the cleaning rod and turned her head to look at him. Her eyes were gray, calm, unreadable. "Captain Kane," she said quietly, "I was wondering when you'd get here." Elias froze. His grip tightened on the SIG. "How do you know my name?" "Same way I know this rifle hasn't been serviced in 4 months." She gestured to the Barrett's components laid out in perfect order on the stainless steel table. "Same way I know you flagged the maintenance gap in a classified report 3 weeks ago, and nobody acted on it." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Elias took 2 steps forward, his boots striking the concrete with deliberate weight. "Who the hell are you?" "Claire Mercer." She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Civilian contractor, maintenance specialist." "Bullshit." Elias didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. "I know every contractor cleared for this facility. You're not on the list." Claire tilted her head slightly, something almost like amusement flickering across her face. "You sure about that?" "Yeah, I'm sure." He moved closer, angling to see if she had a weapon. Nothing visible. No holster bulge, no ankle rig. But that didn't mean much. "Stand up, slowly. Keep your hands where I can see them." She complied, rising from the stool with an unhurried grace that set off every alarm bell in Elias's head. People who moved like that, smooth, economical, no wasted motion, were either dancers or operators. And this woman didn't look like she spent her evenings at the ballet. "I'm not armed," she said, reading his posture, "and I'm not here to cause problems. You're in a restricted weapons bay without authorization. That is a problem." "Is it?" Claire glanced back at the Barrett. "Or is the problem that this rifle is supposed to be mission-ready, and it's not?" Elias felt a vein throb in his temple. "Answer the question. How did you get in here?" "Same way you did. Badge and clearance code?" "Impossible. This bay requires level 5 access. There are maybe 12 people on this entire base with that clearance, and I know all of them." Claire reached into her back pocket. Elias's hand moved to his sidearm, but she only pulled out a laminated ID card. She held it up between two fingers. The badge showed her face, her name, and a clearance level that made his blood go cold. Level 6. "That's fake," Elias said immediately. "Level 6 doesn't exist on contractor credentials." "It does when the contract isn't supposed to exist either." Claire tucked the badge away. "I'm here to make sure this rifle is ready for an operation that officially isn't happening, against a threat that officially isn't there. And you officially didn't see me." Elias stared at her. His mind raced through protocols, chains of command, every regulation drilled into him over a decade and a half of service. None of it accounted for this. "I don't care what clearance you claim to have. You don't touch that weapon without me verifying your credentials through command." "Go ahead." Claire gestured toward the secure terminal mounted on the far wall. "Call it in. But before you do, ask yourself why nobody told you I'd be here." He hated that she had a point. Black Ridge ran on information compartmentalization. Need to know was gospel. There were entire wings of the facility Elias had never set foot in, operations he'd never been briefed on, assets he'd never seen. That was how it worked. That was how it had to work. But this was different. This was his armory, his responsibility, and this woman, whoever she really was, had just punched a hole through everything he thought he controlled. "You've got 30 seconds to convince me not to call security," Elias said. "Starting now." Claire crossed her arms, leaning back against the table. "You filed a maintenance request for this rifle on February 8th. Said it needed a full breakdown and optics recalibration. You flagged it as urgent because you noticed the barrel had over 2,000 rounds through it without a documented cleaning cycle." Elias felt his stomach tighten. That report had been classified. Eyes only for Armory Command and Senior Logistics. "Keep talking." "Your request got denied. Budget constraints," they said. "Postponed indefinitely. But you knew that was garbage because you'd seen the allocation reports. Plenty of money for contractor support. Just not for this particular rifle." She paused. "Want to know why?" "Enlighten me." "Because this rifle doesn't belong to Black Ridge. It's on loan, and the people who own it don't want anyone asking questions about why it needs to be perfect in the next 72 hours. Elias's jaw clenched. "And you are?" "The person who makes it perfect." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Elias studied her face, searching for a tell, a crack, anything that suggested she was bluffing. But there was nothing. Just that unnerving calm. The kind that came from someone who'd been in worse situations than a pissed-off captain with a sidearm. "Terminal," Claire said, nodding toward the wall. "Run a query on this rifle's service history. Use authentication code Tango Victor 7 Delta 6. Elias didn't move. "That's a command-level access code." "Yeah, it is." He hesitated. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that he should call it in, lock her down, let someone else sort out the mess. But something else, something deeper, quieter, told him to look first. He crossed to the terminal, keeping her in his peripheral vision. The screen glowed pale blue as he logged in with his credentials, then entered the authentication code she'd given him. The system paused, processed. Then a file opened that he'd never seen before. Asset designation, Longshot 7. Weapon platform, Barrett, M107. A1, serial number X, M4419B. Operational status, active/black tier. Confirmed eliminations 73, max effective range 3,247 meters. Primary operator, redacted. Elias felt the floor shift beneath him. 73 confirmed kills, over 2 miles of effective range. Black tier classification meant this rifle, and whoever used it, existed in a shadow so deep even most generals didn't know about it. Jesus Christ, he muttered. Close, Claire said from behind him. But not quite. He turned to face her. You're telling me you're the operator? I'm telling you this rifle needs to be ready, and I'm the only one who can make that happen. Elias shook his head. You expect me to believe a civilian contractor is running black tier operations? I expect you to believe the evidence in front of you. Claire moved back to the table, picking up a carbon fiber component from the rifle's bolt assembly. This weapon has been used in 11 operations across 4 continents. Every shot was authorized, every target was verified, and every time the job got done because I know this rifle better than I know my own heartbeat. She held the part up to the light, inspecting a hairline imperfection Elias wouldn't have noticed without a magnifying glass. Wind drift at 2 kilometers changes by 0.3 miles for every 5-degree temperature shift, Claire continued, her voice taking on a clinical precision. Atmospheric density at altitude reduces bullet velocity by roughly 1% per 1,000 feet. The Coriolis effect at extreme range requires a lateral adjustment that most shooters don't even know exists. This rifle, she set the component down with a soft click, has made shots that shouldn't be possible, because I made them possible. Elias watched her hands as she spoke. They moved with absolute confidence, no hesitation, no second guessing. These weren't the hands of someone playing pretend. These were the hands of a craftsman, a professional, maybe even an artist. Show me, he said quietly. Claire looked up. Show you what? Prove it. Reassemble the rifle. If you're really who you say you are, you'll do it faster than anyone I've ever seen. A faint smile touched her lips. Timing me, Captain? Call it professional curiosity. She didn't answer, just turned back to the table and went to work. What happened next was something Elias would replay in his mind for years. Claire's hands became a blur of controlled motion, each movement precise and economical. The lower receiver locked into place with a satisfying snap. The bolt carrier group slid home like it was magnetized. Springs, pins, levers, everything found its home without hesitation, without error. She didn't look at instruction manuals or reference guides. She didn't pause to double-check alignment. She just knew. 47 seconds later, the Barrett M107A1 sat fully assembled on the table, ready for combat. Elias exhaled slowly. That's impressive. That's necessity. Claire lifted the rifle, sighting down the barrel with practiced ease. You asked for proof. There it is. I need more than a fast assembly time. Then ask your questions, but make them count. I don't have all night. Elias pulled up a stool and sat down, his sidearm still holstered, but his hand never far from it. How long have you been doing this? Longer than you've been wearing that uniform. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. Claire set the rifle down and began inspecting the scope mounts. Next question. Why this rifle? Why now? Because in 72 hours, there's a window. A very small window. And if this rifle isn't perfect, that window closes. What kind of window? Claire's eyes met his. The kind where missing the shot means people don't come home. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed. The sound echoed down the empty corridor, then vanished into silence. Elias leaned forward. You're talking about a rescue operation. I'm not talking about anything officially. Claire's voice dropped, taking on an edge he hadn't heard before. But hypothetically, if there were American personnel in a situation where conventional extraction wasn't possible, and if there were a threat element that needed to be neutralized from extreme range to create an opening, then hypothetically someone would need to make a shot that most people think is impossible. How extreme are we talking? Call it 3,000 meters, give or take? Elias felt his chest tighten. That's nearly 2 miles. That's Tuesday. Nobody makes shots like that in the field. Too many variables. Wind, elevation, target movement. I've made 12, Claire interrupted. Longest was 3,200 meters. Target was mobile, high-value individual. 2 bodyguards. I put the round through his sternum while he was walking up a staircase. She said it with the same tone someone might use to describe a grocery list. The bodyguards didn't even know he was dead until he stopped moving. Elias stared at her. You're talking about assassination. I'm talking about removing threats to American lives. Call it whatever helps you sleep at night. That's not how we operate. That's exactly how we operate. You just don't see it. Claire picked up a bore brush, running it through the rifle's chamber with smooth, practiced strokes. You think wars are won by rules of engagement and congressional oversight? They're won by people like me doing things people like you never hear about. Clean, quiet, final. And you're okay with that? Claire paused. For the first time, something flickered across her face. Something that might have been doubt, or weariness, or the weight of 73 lives ended by her hand. But it passed quickly, buried under layers of professional detachment. Okay, doesn't matter, she said. Necessary does. Elias stood, pacing the length of the room. His mind churned through the implications. If what she was saying was true, if she really was an off-books operator running black-tier missions, then his entire understanding of how the system worked was wrong, or incomplete, or deliberately obscured. Let's say I believe you, he said, stopping at the far end of the room. Let's say you are who you claim to be. That still doesn't explain why you're here, in my armory, without authorization. Your authorization doesn't apply to me. Then whose does? Nobody you'll ever meet. That's not good enough. Claire set down the bore brush and fixed him with a look that could cut steel. Captain Kane, I respect what you do. I respect the responsibility you carry. But you need to understand something. There are levels above you that you'll never reach. Decisions made in rooms you'll never enter. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, those decisions require people who don't exist to do things that never happened. I'm one of those people, and this rifle is one of those things. So you can either accept that and let me finish my work, or you can call security and watch this whole operation collapse because somebody thought protocol mattered more than lives. The words hit like a punch. Elias wanted to argue, to push back, to demand answers that made sense within the framework of everything he'd been taught. But deep down, he knew she was right. He'd seen enough, done enough, to understand that the world ran on secrets, and some secrets were darker than others. How do I know you're not lying? He asked quietly. You don't, but you know what's in that file. You know what this rifle has done, and you know that if I wanted to hurt you or anyone else on this base, I wouldn't have waited for you to walk in. I'd have been gone before you even knew I was here. Elias exhaled slowly. She had him cornered, not with threats or force, but with logic that cut through every objection he could raise. Fine, he said. Finish your work. But I'm staying, and if anything feels wrong, I'm shutting this down. Fair enough. Claire returned to the rifle, her focus narrowing to the task at hand. You might want to grab some coffee. This is going to take a few hours. I don't need coffee. Suit yourself. They fell into an uneasy silence. Elias watched as Claire worked, her movements precise and methodical. She stripped the barrel clean, inspected every groove and land with a jeweler's loupe, then reassembled the weapon with adjustments so minute he couldn't even see what she was changing. But he felt the difference. The rifle seemed to settle into itself, every component aligning with a perfection that went beyond mechanical tolerance. Where did you learn to shoot like that? He asked after a while. Claire didn't look up. I didn't. I was born with it. Nobody's born a sniper. Nobody's born a lot of things. Doesn't mean it's not true. Elias frowned. That's not how skill works. Most skill, no. But there's a difference between being good and being singular. Claire paused, her hand stilling on the rifle. You ever meet someone who just knows something? No training, no explanation. They just know? That's me in distance shooting. I see wind before it touches the ground. I feel gravitational drift in my bones. I can tell you the exact ballistic arc of a round before it leaves the barrel. Not because I learned it, because I am it. That sounds like a mythology. It is, until you see the results. She tapped the rifle's stock. 73 confirmed. 0 margin for error. That's not mythology, Captain. That's data. Elias wanted to argue, but the evidence was right there, glowing on the terminal screen, carved into mission logs he'd never been cleared to see. 73 lives ended by a woman who shouldn't exist, using a rifle that officially wasn't there. "Why do it?" he asked. "If you're that good, you could name your price, work private sector, make millions." "I do." "Then why the secrecy? Why the Ghost Act?" Claire set down the cleaning cloth and looked at him directly. "Because the targets I eliminate aren't the kind that make it onto CNN. They're the ones planning attacks that would kill thousands. The ones building networks that destabilize entire regions. The ones who hide behind borders and diplomatic immunity and the legal gray zones where conventional operations can't reach." She picked up the rifle again, sighting through the scope at an invisible target. "I do what I do because someone has to, and I'm better at it than anyone else alive." The confidence in her voice wasn't arrogance, it was certainty. The kind that came from testing yourself against impossible odds and winning every time. "You ever miss?" Elias asked. Claire's jaw tightened. "Once." "What happened?" "Someone died who shouldn't have." "Collateral?" "No. I missed the shot. Target walked. 2 weeks later, he orchestrated an attack on a checkpoint in Kandahar. 6 dead, 11 wounded. All because I didn't account for a crosswind I should have seen coming." The pain in her voice was subtle, but it was there. Buried deep, locked away, but still bleeding through the cracks. "That wasn't your fault," Elias said. "It was my shot, my responsibility, my failure." Claire lowered the rifle. "I don't miss anymore." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of unspoken histories pressing down on the room. Elias thought about his own failures, the missions that went sideways, the calls he second-guessed in the dead of night. Every soldier carried ghosts. The question was whether you let them haunt you or whether you use them as fuel. "How do you live with it?" he asked quietly. "The weight of all those shots?" Claire's hand stilled on the rifle. She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost vulnerable. "You don't. You just carry it. Every shot has a name, a face, a story I'll never know. But I also know the people they would have killed, the families who got to go home because someone made the hard call." She looked at him, and for the first time Elias saw the toll it had taken, the lines around her eyes, the faint tremor in her hands when she thought he wasn't looking. "I don't sleep well, Captain. Probably never will. But necessity doesn't care about my comfort. So I do the job, and I do it better than anyone else." Elias nodded slowly. He understood that language. Duty, sacrifice, the cost of keeping the world spinning while everyone else slept safely in their beds. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "I don't know, someone colder maybe, more detached." Claire allowed herself a small smile. "I saved the detachment for the trigger pull. Everything else is just life." She went back to work and Elias watched in silence. The hours stretched on. Outside the sealed room, the base continued its rhythm, patrols, shift changes, the endless grind of military routine. But inside Weapons Bay 4, time seemed to slow. There was only Claire, the rifle, and the impossible precision required to turn metal and mathematics into salvation. At some point, Elias realized he wasn't watching a technician anymore. He was watching an artist. Every adjustment, every calibration, every infinitesimal tweak was part of a larger symphony only she could hear. The rifle wasn't just a tool. It was an extension of her will, her purpose, her entire reason for existing, and that terrified him. "How close are you?" he asked as the clock ticked past midnight. "Almost there. Just need to zero the optics and run a function check." "What happens after that?" "I disappear. You forget this conversation. And 72 hours from now, you hear about a successful operation that officially never happened." "And if something goes wrong?" Claire didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew the answer. If something went wrong, people died. And the world kept turning like nothing had happened. She finished the final adjustments, then lifted the rifle and moved to the far end of the room where a ballistic testing station sat unused. She activated the laser bore sight, aligning it with a target downrange. The adjustments were microscopic, fractions of an inch, barely visible to the naked eye. But Elias saw the difference in her posture, the way her breathing slowed, the way the world seemed to narrow to a single point of focus. "Perfect," she whispered. Then she safed the rifle, broke it down one last time, and packed it into a nondescript hard case that could have belonged to anyone. "That's it?" Elias asked. "That's it." Claire stood, slinging the case over her shoulder. "Thank you for not making this harder than it needed to be. I'm still not convinced I made the right call." "You did, but you won't know for sure until it's over." She moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing." "What?" "If anyone asks, this maintenance was logged under standard protocol. No names, no flags, no anomalies, just routine work by authorized personnel." "And if I don't?" Claire turned to face him, and for a moment the mask slipped. The operator, the ghost, the woman who didn't exist, all of it fell away, leaving only someone tired, worn down by years of impossible choices. "Then you condemn the people this rifle is supposed to save, and you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if protocol mattered more than their lives." She adjusted the case on her shoulder. "Your call, Captain." Elias felt the weight of 15 years in uniform crash down on his shoulders. Every regulation, every chain of command, every lesson drilled into him said he should report this. Lock it down. Let someone higher up make the call. But standing in that cold, fluorescent-lit room, watching a woman who carried 73 ghosts walk toward the door, Elias made a different choice. "Go," he said quietly. Claire nodded once. "Thank you." She reached for the door handle, then stopped. "One more thing. When this is over, and you hear about what happened, don't look for me. Don't try to verify. Just know that the people who came home did so because someone made an impossible shot in the dark. And leave it at that." "What if I want to know more?" "Then you're not as smart as I thought you were." With that, she pulled open the door and stepped into the dimly lit corridor beyond. The hydraulic hinges hissed shut behind her, cutting off the last glimpse of auburn hair and a rifle case that held the weight of the world. Elias stood alone in the weapons bay, his heart pounding, his mind racing with questions he'd never be able to answer. He looked at the terminal, still glowing with the classified file he should never have seen. 73 confirmed eliminations. 3,000 meters of impossible distance. A woman who existed in the spaces between official records. He should delete the file, scrub the logs, pretend none of this had happened. But instead he sat down at the terminal and started typing. Maintenance log. Weapons bay. 4. Date. Current. Asset. Barrett. M107. A1. Serial number XM-4419-B. Work performed. Full breakdown, cleaning, optics calibration. Technician. Authorized personnel. Status. Mission ready. Notes. All specifications within tolerance. No anomalies detected. He saved the log, closed the file, and logged out. The screen went dark. The room fell silent except for the hum of ventilation and the distant echo of boots on concrete somewhere far away. Elias stood, holstered his sidearm, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle, looking back at the empty workbench where Claire had sat just minutes ago. The steel table gleamed under the harsh lights, spotless and cold. No evidence, no trace, just the ghost of a conversation that officially never happened. He stepped into the corridor and let the door seal shut behind him with a final definitive click. Somewhere in the Nevada desert, under a sky filled with stars invisible from the base's interior, Claire Mercer walked toward a vehicle that wasn't on any manifests. The rifle case rested across her shoulders, familiar and heavy, carrying the weight of missions yet to come. She didn't look back. Never did. Looking back meant hesitation, and hesitation meant failure. And she didn't miss anymore. The engine started with a quiet rumble. Headlights cut through the darkness, and then she was gone, dissolving into the night like smoke before dawn, leaving behind only questions and the faint echo of 73 shots that changed the world in ways no one would ever know. Back in his office, Elias Kane sat in the dark, staring at the phone on his desk. He should call this in, report the breach, cover his ass. But he didn't. Instead, he poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon from the bottle he kept locked in his desk drawer and waited for the sun to rise over a world that had just become a little more complicated than he'd ever imagined. 72 hours. That's what she'd said. 72 hours until he'd know if he'd made the right choice, or the worst mistake of his life. The bourbon burned going down, but Elias welcomed it. Pain was clarity. Pain was proof that the last 3 hours hadn't been some fever dream conjured by too many late shifts and not enough sleep. He set the glass on his desk with a hollow thunk and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling tiles he'd counted 1,000 times before. 72 hours. The number circled his thoughts like a vulture. 72 hours until something happened that would either validate the most reckless decision of his career or bury him so deep he'd never see daylight again. He'd let an unvetted operative, if she was even an operative, walk out of a restricted facility with a weapon tied to classified operations he wasn't cleared to know about. That wasn't bending the rules. That was snapping them in half and setting fire to the pieces. His phone buzzed. A text from Major Sarah Vickers, second in command of base operations. "You still awake?" Elias grimaced. Sarah had radar for trouble. 15 years in intelligence analysis had given her a sixth sense for when something was off. He typed back quickly. "Yeah, couldn't sleep." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Need to talk. My office. Now." His stomach dropped. He grabbed his jacket and headed out, mind racing through explanations that wouldn't immediately get him court-martialed. The corridors were mostly empty at this hour, just a skeleton crew and the night watch cycling through their rounds. His boots echoed against polished floors as he made his way to the operations wing. Sarah's office was a converted storage room that somehow managed to feel both cramped and imposing. Maps covered the walls. Monitors glowed with real-time intel feeds. She sat behind a desk buried under reports and coffee cups, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun that had started to fray around the edges. "Close the door," she said without looking up. Elias complied. "What's this about?" "You tell me." Sarah finally met his eyes. "I got a flag from facility security. Someone accessed Weapons Bay 4 using a level 6 clearance code at 2100 hours. Elias kept his face neutral. "I was running maintenance checks. You have level 5 clearance, Kane, not 6. I used my own credentials. The system must have logged it wrong." Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying him with the intensity of someone who'd spent years interrogating suspects in rooms with no windows. "The system doesn't make mistakes like that. And you know it." "Then maybe it was a glitch. A glitch that conveniently erased itself 30 minutes ago?" She pulled up a screen, rotating the monitor so he could see. The access log showed his badge swipe at 2103. Then nothing. No secondary entries, no level 6 authentication, just a clean record that matched his story perfectly, too perfectly. "Someone scrubbed the logs," Sarah said quietly. "Someone with access high enough that even I can't see the override trail. So I'll ask you again, Captain, what happened in that weapons bay?" Elias's pulse hammered in his ears. He could lie, stick to the maintenance story, hope whatever Claire had done to cover her tracks held up under scrutiny, or he could tell the truth and watch his career implode in real time. "I was checking on the Barrett," he said carefully. "The M107A1. Someone flagged it for service, and I wanted to verify the status before Tuesday's rotation." "Who flagged it?" "Maintenance request came through normal channels." "Show me." "It's not in the system anymore. Got processed and closed out." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Convenient. It's protocol. Completed work orders get archived after 48 hours. Not the sensitive ones. Those stay active for review." She stood, moving around the desk to stand directly in front of him. Sarah was 5'6" and barely 130 pounds, but she had a presence that made grown men reconsider their life choices. "You're lying to me, Kane, and we both know it." Elias held her gaze. "I'm telling you what I know." "Then you don't know enough, or you know too much." She crossed her arms. "I've worked with you for 6 years. You're a lot of things. Stubborn, occasionally reckless, definitely a pain in my ass, but you're not a liar. So whatever you walked into tonight, whatever you think you're protecting, it's going to bite you. Hard. Is that a threat? It's a warning from someone who actually gives a damn whether you survive the week." Sarah moved back to her desk, pulling up another file. "You want to know what else happened tonight? At 22:45, a civilian vehicle left the base through the south gate. No manifest, no log departure, no identification check. Gate guard said the driver had priority clearance and waved them through without question. Elias felt ice form in his chest. Who was the guard? Corporal Jensen. 22 years old, exemplary record, never questioned an order in his life. And when I asked him what the driver looked like, you know what he said? What? He couldn't remember. Not gender, not hair color, not even what kind of car it was. Just that they had clearance, and he let them go. Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Someone wiped his memory, Kane, or programmed him, or scared him so badly he's choosing amnesia over the truth. And that same someone scrubbed our security logs so clean I can't even find the digital fingerprints. Elias said nothing. What could he say? That he'd encountered a ghost who moved through classified systems like smoke through a screen door? That he'd stood 3 feet from a woman who claimed 73 kills and believed her because the alternative was worse? Sarah sighed. I'm not going to push this. Not tonight. But whatever you're caught up in, be careful. Because the people who operate at that level don't leave loose ends, and you, Captain Kane, are starting to look a lot like a loose end. Noted. Go get some sleep. You look like hell. Elias left without another word, his mind churning. Sarah was right. He was a loose end. The only person on base who'd seen Claire, who knew she existed, who could connect her to that rifle, and whatever operation was spinning up in 72 hours. That made him either an asset or a liability. He had a sinking feeling he knew which one. Back in his quarters, Elias pulled up every piece of information he had clearance to access. Personnel files, contractor registries, operational reports from the last 6 months. He searched for any mention of Claire Mercer, any reference to civilian maintenance specialists with advanced weapons training, anything that would prove he hadn't just helped a ghost vanish into the desert with a rifle that didn't exist. Nothing. Claire Mercer wasn't in the system, not as a contractor, not as a consultant, not even as a flagged alias. It was like she'd never been there at all, except she had. Elias could still see her hands moving across the Barrett, could still hear the clinical precision in her voice as she described wind drift and ballistic trajectories, could still feel the weight of her gaze when she'd asked him to let her go. He opened his personal email, drafting a message to an old friend from his Army Ranger days. Marcus Webb worked private security now, high-end clients, discreet operations, the kind of work that lived in the margins between legal and necessary. If anyone knew about off-books operators and black tier missions, it would be Marcus. Need information on a shooter. Civilian contractor, female, possibly operating under the name Claire Mercer. Any connections to DoD black programs or JSOC operations appreciated. He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then shut down the computer and tried to sleep. He didn't. Instead, he lay in the dark, watching shadows crawl across the ceiling, wondering if Claire was out there right now, preparing for whatever impossible shot she'd been hired to make. Wondering if the people she was supposed to save even knew someone like her existed. Wondering if he'd just helped a hero or enabled something far worse. Morning came gray and cold. Elias dragged himself through PT, forcing his body through the motions while his mind stayed locked on that weapons bay and the woman who'd walked out of it like she owned the night. The other officers sensed his distraction, keeping their distance during the post-run cooldown. Even the usual morning banter felt muted, like the base itself had picked up on the tension radiating from him. His phone buzzed during breakfast. Marcus Webb, call me. Secure line. Elias found an empty briefing room and dialed the number Marcus had sent. It rang twice before connecting. You're poking at things that don't want to be poked, Marcus said without preamble. His voice had the rough edge of too many cigarettes and not enough sleep. So she's real. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Elias glanced at the door, making sure it was sealed. What can you tell me? Officially? Nothing. The name you gave me doesn't exist in any database I can access, and I can access a lot. And unofficially? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something darker. There are rumors, whispers about a shooter who doesn't miss, someone who's been operating in the shadows for the better part of a decade, cleaning up problems that can't be solved with diplomacy or conventional force. No name, no face, no official existence, just results. Impossible results. 73 confirmed eliminations, Elias said quietly. Jesus Christ, Kane, where did you hear that number? Does it matter? Yeah, it matters. Because if you're talking to the person I think you're talking to, you need to forget this conversation ever happened and pray they don't decide you're a problem. Too late for that. Then you're either dead or useful, and I don't know which scares me more. Marcus exhaled sharply. Listen to me very carefully. The people who run operations at that level don't leave witnesses. They don't leave trails. And they sure as hell don't leave friendly captains walking around with enough knowledge to compromise national security. So whatever you think you know, whatever you think you saw, bury it deep, or it's going to bury you. I let her walk out with a rifle tied to an active operation. Then you made the right call, because if you'd tried to stop her, you'd already be gone, reassigned to some forward operating base in the middle of nowhere, or worse. Marcus paused. There's a reason people like her exist outside the system. It's because the system can't handle what they do, can't acknowledge it, can't control it. So they cut them loose, point them at the problem, and pretend they never existed. That's not how we're supposed to operate. Wake up, Kane. That's exactly how we operate. It's just usually you're not close enough to see it. Another pause. Do yourself a favor. Forget this happened. Go back to your maintenance logs and your routine inspections and let the world keep turning without you trying to understand every piece of it. And if I can't, then I'll see you at your funeral. The line went dead. Elias sat in the empty briefing room, staring at his phone, feeling the walls close in. Marcus was right. He was trapped in a situation with no good exits. Report what he'd seen and risk compromising an operation that might save lives. Stay silent and become complicit in something he didn't fully understand. Either way, he was crossing lines he'd spent 15 years respecting. A knock on the door made him jump. Sarah Vickers leaned in, her expression unreadable. Got a minute? She asked. Not really. Make one. She stepped inside and closed the door. We need to talk about the elephant in the room. Which one? The one where you're acting like a man who just sold his soul and isn't sure he got a fair price. Sarah sat down across from him, her gaze sharp. I did some digging after our conversation last night, called in favors, checked with contacts at JSOC, NSA, even a few people I know at Langley. And nobody knows anything about a civilian contractor named Claire Mercer, which by itself isn't unusual. Contractors come and go. But what is unusual is that 3 different people told me to stop asking questions. Not politely either. One of them, a deputy director I've known for 8 years, said if I valued my career, I'd drop it immediately. Elias felt his chest tighten. What did you say? I said I'd think about it. Then I called my old CO from my time in Baghdad. Guy named Hutchins, retired now, runs a consulting firm, still has connections that go all the way to the top. Sarah leaned forward. He told me a story about a mission in 2019, hostage situation in Yemen, high-value American target, heavily guarded compound, zero margin for error. Extraction team was pinned down, running out of time, and the window for air support had closed. They were dead. All of them. What happened? Someone made a shot from over 3 kilometers out, eliminated the primary threat and created enough chaos for the team to extract. No casualties. Mission success. And when the after-action report came through, there was no mention of the shooter, just a note that said, external asset provided support. That's it. No name, no details, nothing. Elias felt his blood run cold. Did Hutchins know who it was? He said he saw the ballistic analysis, the angle, the distance, the environmental factors. It should have been impossible. But someone made it, and whoever they were, they disappeared before the team even made it back to base. Sarah's eyes locked onto his. You met that person, didn't you? Elias wanted to lie. Wanted to protect whatever remained of plausible deniability. But looking at Sarah, someone who'd earned his trust 100 times over, he couldn't. Yeah, he said quietly. I did. Sarah nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd already suspected. And you let her go? I did. Why? Because the alternative was worse. They sat in silence for a long moment. the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on them both. Finally, Sarah stood. "I'm going to pretend we never had this conversation," she said. "And you're going to do the same. But Kane? Whatever's about to happen, whatever that rifle is being used for, it better be worth it. Because if it's not, we're both going down." "Understood." Sarah left without another word, and Elias was alone again with his thoughts and the ticking clock inside his head. 72 hours. Now less than 48. Every minute that passed felt like sand slipping through his fingers, carrying him toward a moment of truth he couldn't control. He spent the rest of the day going through the motions. Inspections, briefings, paperwork that piled up faster than he could process it. But his mind was elsewhere, running through scenarios, calculating outcomes, trying to convince himself he'd made the right call. By nightfall, he was back in his quarters, staring at his laptop, debating whether to dig deeper or let it go. The smart move was to walk away. Forget Claire Mercer, forget the Barrett, forget the whole impossible situation, and trust that people smarter and more connected than him knew what they were doing. But Elias had never been good at walking away. He opened a secure browser and started searching. Not for Claire directly, that was a dead end, but for patterns. Operations that matched her profile. Missions where impossible shots had changed outcomes. Incidents that officially never happened but left traces in classified reports and redacted documents. It took hours, but he found them. Small mentions buried deep in after-action summaries, references to external support and off-site coordination, ballistic analyses that didn't match standard military profiles. And always the same result, mission success against impossible odds. The pattern stretched back over a decade. Different locations, different targets, but the same signature. Someone was out there, moving through the shadows, making shots that shouldn't exist, keeping Americans alive while staying invisible. And Elias had met her, talked to her, let her walk away. A new email notification pulled him from his thoughts. Marcus Webb again, but this time the message was just a link. No explanation, no context. Elias clicked it, and his screen filled with a news article from an international outlet. Diplomatic convoy attacked in Southeast Asia. American personnel safe. The article was light on details. A motorcade carrying U.S. Embassy staff had been ambushed on a remote highway. Hostile forces had blocked the road, preparing to overwhelm the security detail. Then, according to witnesses, the lead attacker had simply collapsed. No gunshot sound, no visible shooter, just sudden death from an impossible angle. The convoy had escaped. All personnel accounted for. 0 casualties. The incident had happened 6 hours ago. Elias read the article 3 times, his hands shaking. Southeast Asia. Remote highway. Impossible shot. The math aligned too perfectly to be coincidence. Somewhere in the jungle, Claire Mercer had set up on a ridgeline or a rooftop or a mountainside and made a shot that saved lives while erasing her own existence from the narrative. 74 confirmed eliminations now. He closed the laptop and sat in the dark, feeling the weight of what he'd done settle over him like a shroud. He'd been part of it. Not directly, not operationally, but he'd enabled it. He'd looked the other way when he should have raised alarms. He'd chosen trust over protocol. And people were alive because of it. That should have felt like victory, like validation, but instead it felt like falling into something deeper and darker than he'd ever imagined. Because if Claire Mercer was real, if operations like this happened outside official channels, then everything he thought he knew about how the world worked was wrong. Or worse, it was exactly right, and he'd just been too naive to see it. A soft knock on his door pulled him from his thoughts. Elias opened it to find a young lieutenant standing in the hallway, holding a sealed envelope. "Captain Kane, this just came through secure courier. For your eyes only." Elias took the envelope, noting the weight of it. Heavy cardstock, no return address, just his name typed in precise block letters. "Who delivered it?" he asked. "Don't know, sir. It was in the duty officer's inbox when I came on shift. No record of who dropped it off." Elias dismissed the lieutenant and closed the door. He turned the envelope over in his hands, instinct screaming that opening it would cross yet another line he couldn't uncross. But curiosity and something darker, something that felt like obligation, won out. Inside was a single photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph showed a group of people standing in front of a damaged convoy vehicle, smiling despite the visible stress on their faces. Embassy staff, security personnel, civilians who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time and lived to tell about it because someone had made an impossible shot from an impossible distance. The note was short, just 3 lines in neat, precise handwriting. They made it home. You made the right call. Forget you ever saw me. No signature, no name, just words that confirmed everything and explained nothing. Elias stared at the photograph, memorizing faces he'd never meet, lives he'd helped save without even knowing their names. This was the cost of operating in the shadows. This was what it meant to make the hard calls and live with the weight of them. He burned the note and the photograph in his sink, watching the paper curl and blacken until only ash remained. Then he washed it all down the drain, erasing the evidence like Claire had erased herself from every record and every memory. 48 hours had become 24. The operation was over. The threat was gone. The mission had succeeded, and Elias Kane was left standing in his quarters, staring at the empty sink, wondering if he'd just witnessed something heroic or something terrible. Maybe it was both. Maybe that's what it meant to live in a world where necessity outweighed comfort, where hard choices saved lives, and where people like Claire Mercer existed in the spaces between what was legal and what was right. He poured himself another bourbon, his 2nd of the night, his 10th of the week, and raised the glass to the empty room. To the ghosts, he whispered, and the people they save. Then he drank, letting the burn chase away questions he'd never be able to answer, and tried to convince himself that forgetting was possible. It wasn't. But he'd try anyway, because that's what soldiers did. They carried the weight, they made the hard calls, and they lived with the consequences long after everyone else had moved on. Somewhere in the Nevada desert, under stars that had witnessed 1,000 secrets, the wind carried away the last traces of a woman who'd never been there. And the world kept turning, safer and more dangerous than anyone knew. The bourbon glass was still in Elias's hand when the base alarm shattered the silence. Not the routine drill tone. Not the security breach alert he'd heard 100 times during exercises. This was the real thing, a piercing wail that meant incoming threat, active danger, all hands to stations. His body moved before his mind caught up, muscle memory from 15 years of service dropping the glass and reaching for his sidearm in one fluid motion. He was out the door and running before the liquid even finished spreading across the floor. The corridors erupted with controlled chaos. Operators sprinted toward designated rally points, boots hammering concrete in perfect rhythm. Radio chatter crackled through wall-mounted speakers, clipped voices reporting status updates that made Elias's blood freeze. Multiple hostiles confirmed inside the perimeter. Armed breach at the southeast quadrant. We have casualties. Medical teams to the operations wing. Elias slammed through the door to the command center and found Sarah Vickers already coordinating response teams, her face locked in the cold focus of someone running triage on a nightmare scenario. Talk to me, Elias barked. 6 hostiles penetrated the fence line at 2200. Professional entry, sophisticated bypass of our security grid. They knew exactly where to hit. Sarah pulled up security footage, showing figures in tactical gear moving with military precision through blind spots in the camera coverage. They went straight for the classified archives. What do they want? Intel? Operational files? Maybe our personnel roster? She turned to him, and for the first time since he'd known her, he saw genuine fear in her eyes. Or they're looking for something specific, someone specific. The implication hit Elias like a physical blow. Claire. They were looking for information on Claire Mercer, or the rifle, or the operation that had just concluded half a world away. Someone had connected the dots and decided Black Ridge knew too much. Current status? He demanded. 4 hostiles neutralized, 2 still active, last seen heading toward the detention wing. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up building schematics. They've got our response teams pinned down with suppressive fire, professional tactics, high-grade equipment. This isn't some random terror cell. Who are they? Unknown. No patches, no insignia, no identification, just ghosts with guns. Elias felt the irony burn. Ghosts hunting ghosts. The world Claire operated in had reached out and grabbed him by the throat. Where's our closest QRF? He asked, referring to the quick reaction force. 8 minutes out. But we've got 17 personnel trapped in the west corridor between the hostels and the exit. If those two shooters decide to go loud, we're looking at a massacre. Elias's mind raced through options. Standard protocol said lock down, contain, wait for reinforcements. But standard protocol assumed the hostiles didn't have a timeline, didn't have an objective that required speed over stealth. If they were here for information about Claire, they'd grab what they could and disappear before QRF arrived, which meant people would die for nothing. "I'm going in," Elias said. "The hell you are. You're armory command, not tactical response. I know this facility better than anyone else on base. Every corridor, every access point, every place someone could hide or set an ambush." He checked his sidearm, full magazine, one in the chamber. Not enough for a sustained firefight, but enough to make a difference if he was smart. "Get me an entry vector and real-time updates on hostile movement." Sarah grabbed his arm. "Kane, this is suicide. You're not equipped for—" "I'm equipped for exactly this. I just spent 15 years training for the day everything goes sideways." He met her eyes. "Those 17 people don't have 8 minutes. They have maybe 3 before those hostiles decide covering their exit is more important than precision." She held his gaze for a long moment, then released his arm and pulled up a tactical overlay. West corridor is blocked here and here, but there's a maintenance access that runs parallel, comes out behind where we think the hostiles are staged. Environmental? Tight quarters, low light, multiple blind corners, perfect for an ambush. Theirs or yours? Good. Elias headed for the door, then paused. "If I don't make it back, burn my office. Everything in my desk, my computer, all of it. Don't ask why. Just do it." "Kane, promise me." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Promised." Elias ran. The maintenance corridor was everything she'd warned, narrow, dim, claustrophobic. Emergency lighting cast everything in sickly red, turning shadows into threats and threats into shadows. He moved fast but controlled, weapon up, checking corners, listening for movement over the pounding of his own heartbeat. Radio chatter filtered through his earpiece. The hostiles were mobile, repositioning, adapting to the base's defensive response with the kind of tactical fluidity that spoke to high-level training. Special forces. Maybe private military contractors. Definitely people who knew what they were doing. "Hostile 1 moving to the stairwell," Sarah's voice crackled in his ear. "Hostile 2 holding position outside the server room. You're approaching from behind, 50 meters and closing." Elias slowed, controlling his breathing. 50 meters meant he'd have visual in less than 30 seconds. He needed a plan that didn't involve a straight gunfight against someone who probably had better armor, better weapons, and better training in close-quarters combat. Then he saw it. A fire suppression control panel mounted on the wall, connected to the sprinkler system for the entire wing. Not subtle, not quiet, but effective. He pulled the emergency release. Alarms shrieked. Water exploded from ceiling-mounted sprinklers, turning the corridor into a chaos of noise and falling water. Elias moved through it like a ghost, using the confusion to close distance. He rounded the corner and saw Hostile 2, a figure in black tactical gear, rifle up, scanning for threats through the artificial rain. The hostile never saw him coming. Elias hit him from the side, driving his shoulder into the man's ribs and slamming him against the wall. The rifle clattered to the floor. Elias brought his sidearm up, but the hostile was fast, trained, dangerous. A knife appeared from nowhere, slashing toward his throat. Elias twisted, felt the blade kiss his shoulder, then drove his elbow into the hostile's jaw with everything he had. The man went down hard. Elias kicked the rifle away, trained his SIG on the hostile's center mass, and keyed his radio. "Hostile 2 neutralized. West corridor is clear." "Copy that," Sarah responded. "Hostile 1 is moving toward your position. He knows you're there." Of course he did. The water, the noise, the missing radio check from his partner, it all added up to a threat that needed elimination. And Elias had just put himself directly in the crosshairs. He grabbed the hostile's rifle, a high-end HK-416 with custom modifications, and moved to cover behind a support pillar. Water streamed down his face, soaking through his uniform, turning the floor into a slick hazard zone. His shoulder burned where the knife had caught him, but the cut was shallow. He'd had worse. The next hostile appeared 30 seconds later, moving with the kind of controlled aggression that made Elias's tactical instincts scream danger. This one was different, bigger, more deliberate. The way he moved suggested command, leadership, someone used to running operations and eliminating problems. "Drop your weapon," Elias shouted over the alarms. "You're surrounded. It's over." The hostile froze, then slowly turned to face him. Even through the water and poor lighting, Elias could see the cold calculation in the man's eyes. This wasn't someone who surrendered. This was someone who fought until the last bullet or the last breath. "You're Kane," the hostile said. American accent, flat and emotionless. "Captain Elias Kane, Armory Command. 15 years service. Ranger qualified. No wife, one daughter, estranged." Elias felt ice spread through his chest. "Who sent you?" "People who don't like loose ends." The hostile's hand drifted toward his sidearm. "You met someone you shouldn't have, saw something you shouldn't have seen. That makes you a problem." "I'm just a base commander doing my job." "Your job ended the moment you let her walk out of that weapons bay." The hostile's voice carried a note of something that might have been respect or pity. "You made a choice. Now you live with the consequences." The hostile's hand moved. Elias fired first. The shot caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him around. The hostile's return fire went wide, chewing through concrete where Elias had been standing a second before. Elias moved, using the water and chaos to reposition, squeezing off 2 more rounds that forced the hostile into cover behind a ventilation unit. "Give it up," Elias called out. "You're injured, outgunned, and reinforcements are 90 seconds out." 90 seconds is a lifetime. The hostile came out firing, laying down suppressive bursts that forced Elias to dive behind a steel support beam. Rounds sparked off metal, whined through the air, punched holes in walls with devastating force. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about taking Elias down before the end. Elias waited for a reload pause, then popped up and fired 3 quick shots. 2 missed. The third caught the hostile in the leg, dropping him to one knee. But even wounded, even bleeding, the man kept fighting. He raised his weapon for one final shot, and a single round punched through his skull from an impossible angle. The hostile collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. Elias spun, weapon tracking for the new threat, but found only empty corridor and falling water. No shooter, no muzzle flash, just sudden death delivered from somewhere beyond his line of sight. "What the hell?" he whispered. "Kane, what's your status?" Sarah's voice crackled through the radio, tight with concern. "Hostile 1 is down, but I didn't—" He stopped, realization dawning cold and certain. Someone else is here. He moved to the body, checking for vitals he already knew wouldn't be there. The shot had been perfect, clinical, entering through the left temple at an angle that suggested an elevated firing position at least 100 meters distant. But there was no elevated position in this corridor. No windows, no catwalks, nothing that would allow for that kind of shot. Unless the shooter had fired from outside the building through a gap in the structure Elias hadn't even known existed. His radio crackled. Not Sarah's voice, something else. A frequency he shouldn't have had access to. "Clear the corridor." Claire's voice, calm and controlled like she was ordering coffee instead of orchestrating a shadow operation inside a military facility. 30 seconds. "You're here," Elias said into the radio, not sure if she could even hear him. "I never left. Move. Now." He moved. 20 seconds later, an explosion rocked the building. Not large. Controlled, precise, exactly calibrated to collapse the corridor entrance without bringing down the entire structure. Dust and debris filled the air. The sprinklers finally cut off, leaving only the emergency lighting and the settling aftermath of controlled demolition. Elias stood in the cleared corridor, watching smoke drift through red-lit darkness, and keyed his radio. "Sarah, we need to lock down the entire facility. Nobody in or out until we sweep for additional threats." "Already in progress. QRF is arriving now." A pause. "You okay?" "Define okay." "Fair point." Elias walked through the devastation, his mind trying to process what had just happened. Claire had been here the whole time. Watching. Waiting. Ready to intervene the moment things went wrong. She'd known the hostiles would come, known they'd target him, and she'd positioned herself to eliminate the threat before it could eliminate him, which meant she'd been protecting him since the moment she walked out of that weapons bay. Or she'd been protecting her secret, making sure the one person who could identify her stayed alive long enough to be useful. He found her 20 minutes later, after the QRF had swept the facility and medics had triaged the wounded. She was sitting in the same weapons bay where they'd first met, calmly cleaning a rifle that definitely wasn't the Barrett. A Chaytak M200 intervention, if Elias's recognition was correct. The kind of precision instrument that could make impossible shots through impossible conditions, like threading around through a 3-inch gap in a building structure to eliminate a hostile 100 meters away. "You came back," Elias said from the doorway. Claire didn't look up from her work. "I told you, loose ends get people killed. So you stayed to protect me, or to protect your operation?" "Both." She set down the cleaning rod and finally met his eyes. Those men weren't random. They were cleaners, sent to eliminate anyone who knew about the Southeast Asia operation. That included you, whether you realized it or not. Who sent them? Does it matter? They're dealt with. The threat is contained. You're alive. She went back to the rifle. That's all you need to know. Elias stepped into the room, letting the door seal behind him. That's not good enough anymore. You've made me part of this whether I wanted it or not. So tell me the truth. All of it. Who are you really working for? Claire was quiet for a long moment, her hand stilling on the weapon. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that went deeper than simple secrecy. I work for the people who can't be saved by conventional means, the hostages in rooms without doors, the diplomats surrounded by enemies, the soldiers trapped behind lines that don't officially exist. She looked at him, and for the first time he saw the full cost written across her face. I'm the answer to prayers that can't be spoken out loud, the miracle that never gets acknowledged, the shot that changes everything while officially never happening. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're going to get. Claire stood, slinging the rifle case over her shoulder with practiced ease. You did well tonight, Captain, better than I expected. You have instincts most people spend decades developing, maybe even the makings of someone who could operate at this level. I don't want to operate at this level. Then forget you ever saw me. Forget this conversation. Forget the last 72 hours and go back to your normal life. She moved toward the door, then paused. But we both know you won't, because you've seen the truth now. You know what exists in the shadows, and that kind of knowledge changes you. Is that a threat? It's a warning and an offer. Elias felt his pulse quicken. What kind of offer? Claire turned to face him fully. The people I work for are always looking for talent. People with the right skills, the right mindset, the right willingness to make hard calls when it matters. You've proven you have all three. So if you ever decide that wearing a uniform and following orders isn't enough, there's a door open. A way into the world behind the world. And if I say no, then you forget we had this conversation and I disappear for good. No contact, no follow-up, no ghost in the night watching your back. She held out a small card, blank except for a single phone number. But if you ever change your mind, call that number, say my name, and someone will reach out. Elias took the card, feeling the weight of the choice it represented. One path led back to the life he knew, structured, regulated, defined by clear lines and official channels. The other led into darkness, ambiguity, the kind of operations that existed in whispers and shadows, and the spaces between legal and necessary. What's the catch? He asked. There's always a catch. You know that. Claire's expression softened slightly. The catch is you can never go back. Once you step through that door, you're in. Completely, forever. Your old life ends, your name disappears, you become someone else. Someone who doesn't exist except when absolutely necessary. Sounds lonely. It is, but it's also the most important work you'll ever do. She moved to the door, then looked back one final time. Think about it, but don't take too long. People like you, people with conscience and capability, don't stay on the market forever. Then she was gone, melting into the corridors with the same effortless invisibility she'd demonstrated from the beginning. Elias stood alone in the weapons bay, holding a card that represented everything he'd been taught to avoid and everything he was starting to realize he might actually want. The rest of the night passed in a blur of debriefings, evidence collection, and damage assessment. The official story was simple: a coordinated attack by an unknown terror cell repelled by base security with minimal casualties. The bodies of the hostiles were identified as foreign nationals with ties to extremist networks. The investigation would continue. Justice would be served. None of it was true. But truth had become negotiable somewhere between Claire walking into his life and walking out of it. Sarah found him in his office at dawn, looking exhausted and decades older than she had yesterday. "We need to talk about what really happened," she said without preamble. "Official report covers it." "Bullshit. Those weren't terrorists, they were professionals. And someone took them out with precision that doesn't exist in our standard playbook." She sat down across from him. "I saw the ballistic analysis on Hostile 1. That shot came from outside the building through a gap no bigger than a fist. No scope reflection, no laser designation, no spotter support. Just a perfect kill from an impossible position." "What's your point?" "My point is she saved your life. And probably mine. And everyone else on this base." Sarah leaned forward. "So the question is, what do we do about it?" Elias looked at the card Claire had given him, still sitting on his desk where he'd placed it hours ago. A simple piece of card stock with a phone number that represented a future he'd never imagined. "We do nothing," he said finally. "We file the official report, we move forward, and we trust that the people operating in those shadows know what they're doing." "You really believe that?" "I have to. Because the alternative is admitting we live in a world where the only thing keeping us safe is people we'll never meet, making choices we'll never understand." He met her eyes. "Can you live with that?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I've been living with it my whole career, I just didn't know it until now." She left him alone with his thoughts and the card that represented a door he could walk through or burn. Elias turned it over in his hands, feeling the weight of the choice, the magnitude of what accepting would mean. He thought about Claire, about the 74 lives she'd ended and the thousands she'd saved, about the loneliness in her eyes and the certainty in her voice when she talked about necessity over comfort. He thought about the hostiles who'd come to kill him simply because he'd seen too much, about the realization that his normal life, his structured existence, had been shattered the moment Claire walked into that weapons bay and showed him a world that existed beyond regulations and official channels. And he thought about his daughter, about the life she deserved to live, free from threats she'd never see coming, protected by people who didn't exist. The sun rose over Black Ridge, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Elias stood at his window, watching light chase away shadows, and made his decision. He picked up his phone and dialed the number on the card. It rang 3 times before connecting. No greeting, no voice, just silence waiting for him to speak. "Claire Mercer," Elias said quietly. "She told me to call." The line clicked. A new voice came through, older, authoritative, carrying the weight of someone used to making decisions that shaped the world. "Captain Kane, we've been expecting your call." A pause. "Are you ready for your life to change?" Elias looked at the sunrise, at the base he'd called home for 6 years, at the uniform hanging in his closet that represented everything he'd been. "Yes," he said. "Then report to the following coordinates in 72 hours. Tell no one. Bring nothing. Your old life ends the moment you arrive." The voice gave him a location, somewhere remote, somewhere that didn't exist on any official map. Then the line went dead. Elias set down the phone and stood in the silence of his office, feeling the weight of the choice settle over him like a second skin. There was no going back now, no pretending he could return to normal after everything he'd seen and done. But as he stared at that sunrise, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Real purpose. Not the kind that came from following orders or maintaining systems, but the kind that came from knowing you were making a difference in ways that mattered, even if no one ever knew your name. 72 hours. Same timeline Claire had given him when this all started. But this time, it wasn't about protecting someone else's secret. It was about becoming the secret himself. 72 hours felt like both an eternity and an instant. Elias spent the first day dismantling his life with surgical precision. He filed paperwork for emergency leave, family crisis, personal matter, deliberately vague language that discouraged follow-up questions. He cleared out his office, boxing up 15 years of service medals and commendations and operational photos that suddenly felt like artifacts from someone else's existence. Each item he packed away was another thread cut, another connection severed to the man he'd been before Claire Mercer walked into that weapons bay and showed him the truth. Sarah caught him in the parking lot on the second day, her expression hovering somewhere between concern and accusation. "You're leaving," she said. Not a question. "Taking some time, family stuff." "Don't lie to me, Kane. We've been through too much for that." She crossed her arms, studying him with the analytical precision that had made her one of the best intelligence officers in the service. "You made the call, didn't you? To whoever she works for." Elias considered lying, considered maintaining the fiction for just a little longer, but Sarah deserved better than that. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I did." "When?" "Tonight." Sarah nodded slowly, like she'd been expecting this answer but had hoped she was wrong. "You know what you're walking into?" "No, but I know what I'm walking away from." Elias glanced back at the base, at the buildings and fences and structured order that had defined his adult life. This isn't enough anymore. Maybe it never was. That's the adrenaline talking, the high from surviving last night. Give it time and you'll... "I won't." Elias turned back to her. "You saw what she could do, what people like her can do. That's real impact, Sarah. Not maintenance logs and equipment inventories and playing politics with procurement officers. Actual difference. Lives saved because someone made the hard call. And you think you can be that person?" "I think I have to try." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for something. Doubt, maybe, or fear, or any sign that he could still be talked down from the ledge. But Elias had made his peace with the choice. Whatever came next, it had to be more than this. "You're going to disappear," Sarah said finally. "Completely. No contact, no updates, nothing. Just gone." "That's how it works." "What about your daughter?" The question hit harder than any punch Elias had ever taken. "Emma. 10 years old, living with her mother in Colorado, blissfully unaware that her father was about to vanish from her life in every way that mattered. He'd thought about calling her, trying to explain in terms a child could understand. But how did you tell your daughter that saving strangers was more important than being her father? You didn't. You just carried that weight and hoped she'd understand someday. "I'll make arrangements," Elias said, his voice rough. "Financial support, college fund, everything she needs. Her mother will tell her I'm deployed somewhere I can't communicate from. Eventually, she'll accept it." "Will she? Or will she spend the rest of her life wondering why her father chose ghosts over family?" Elias felt the accusation like a knife between his ribs. "You think I don't know that? You think I haven't spent the last 48 hours tearing myself apart over this choice? Then don't make it. Stay. Be the father she needs instead of the hero she'll never know. And if my staying means someone else's daughter loses her father because I wasn't there to make the impossible shot, how do I live with that?" Sarah's jaw tightened. She didn't have an answer, neither did Elias. That was the problem with operating in the shadows. Every choice had a cost, and you never knew which one was right until it was too late to change your mind. "Take care of yourself, Kane," Sarah said finally. "And if you ever need a way out, if this life turns into something you can't handle, you call me. Doesn't matter when or where. I'll find a way to bring you home. There won't be a home to come back to. Then I'll build you a new one." She held out her hand. "Good luck. You're going to need it." Elias shook her hand, feeling the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on them both. Then he got in his truck and drove away from Black Ridge for the last time, watching the facility shrink in his rearview mirror until it was just another speck in the vast Nevada desert. The coordinates led him to an abandoned airstrip 3 hours north of Reno. Nothing but cracked concrete and wind-scoured buildings that looked like they hadn't seen human activity in decades. Elias arrived an hour before the designated time, using the daylight to scout the perimeter and assess potential threats. Old habits died hard. He found nothing. No surveillance equipment, no hidden personnel, no sign that anyone used this place for anything more than a waypoint for dust storms and forgotten dreams. But he knew better than to trust what his eyes told him. If the people running this operation were half as good as Claire, they'd be watching him right now from positions he'd never spot. Twilight came slow and red, painting the desert in shades of blood and rust. Elias sat on the hood of his truck, watching shadows stretch across broken concrete, and waited for whatever came next. The helicopter arrived exactly on schedule. A black UH-60 with no markings, no tail numbers, nothing that could identify its origin or ownership. It settled onto the cracked runway with professional precision, rotors whipping up dust devils that forced Elias to shield his eyes. A figure emerged from the aircraft. Not Claire. Someone older, harder, carrying themselves with the kind of authority that came from decades of making decisions in rooms that didn't exist. The man wore civilian clothes, dark jeans, tactical jacket, boots that had seen serious use. His hair was silver, cropped military short, and his eyes had the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen things most people couldn't imagine. "Captain Kane," the man said, his voice carrying easily over the helicopter's dying whine. "I'm Director Hale. We spoke on the phone." Elias slid off the truck hood. "Just Elias now. The rank doesn't mean much where we're going." "Smart. You learn quick." Hale gestured toward the helicopter. "We have a flight ahead of us, 1,700 miles to a facility that doesn't exist on any map. You'll be briefed en route. Questions?" "Hundreds. But I'm guessing you won't answer most of them." "You'd be right." Hale allowed himself a thin smile. "But I'll answer one, the most important one you're not asking. Which is? Whether you can trust us. Whether what we do is worth the sacrifice." Hale's expression hardened. "The answer is no. You can't trust us. Not completely. Because trust requires transparency, and transparency is a luxury we can't afford. But what we do, the operations we run, the threats we eliminate, the lives we save, that's worth every sacrifice, every lie, every piece of yourself you have to burn away to become what's necessary." Elias studied the man's face, looking for deception or manipulation. He found only brutal honesty. "Claire said I could never go back," Elias said, "that this door only swings one way. She was being generous. There is no door, just a cliff edge, and once you step off, you're in free fall until we decide you've learned to fly or you hit the ground." Hale turned toward the helicopter. "Last chance to change your mind. Get in that bird, and your old life is over. Everything you were becomes classified. Everyone you knew gets a carefully constructed story about deployment or reassignment or whatever fiction makes them sleep better at night. And my daughter? Gets a father who's always deployed but never forgotten. Financial support through channels she'll never trace. College paid for by a scholarship fund that doesn't exist. And maybe, if you survive long enough and prove yourself valuable enough, she gets to live in a world slightly safer than it would have been without you." It wasn't a good answer, but it was an honest one. Elias climbed into the helicopter. The flight took them northwest, following terrain that grew increasingly rugged and isolated. Mountains gave way to deep forests, then to territory so remote Elias couldn't even guess what state they were in anymore. Hale spent the first hour in silence, reviewing digital files on a ruggedized tablet. Elias used the time to process, to let the reality of his choice sink in, to prepare himself for whatever waited at the end of this journey. Finally, Hale looked up. "I'm going to tell you things now that will make you question everything you thought you knew about how the world works. You're going to want to interrupt, to argue, to demand proof. Don't, just listen. Questions come after." Elias nodded. "The organization you're joining doesn't have a name. Not officially. In the files that acknowledge we exist at all, we're referred to as Section 9. But even that's a fiction, a label to hang on something that refuses easy categorization." Hale swiped through screens, pulling up organizational charts that looked more like spider webs than hierarchies. "We operate outside traditional command structures, outside congressional oversight, outside the legal frameworks that govern conventional military and intelligence operations." "How is that possible?" "I said no interruptions." Hale's voice carried an edge. "It's possible because we were created by presidential order in 1983, during a period when the Cold War was going hot in ways the public never saw. The directive was simple: create a capability to eliminate existential threats through any means necessary, with complete deniability and zero accountability to traditional oversight mechanisms. That's illegal. It's necessary. And necessity trumps legality when you're dealing with threats that don't care about international law or rules of engagement." Hale pulled up a map showing operational zones scattered across 6 continents. "Since our inception, Section 9 has conducted over 2,000 operations." Eliminated threats ranging from rogue nuclear scientists to terrorist cells planning attacks that would have killed millions. Rescued hostages from situations where conventional extraction wasn't possible. Prevented conflicts that would have destabilized entire regions. By operating outside the law. By operating outside the constraints of law. There's a difference. Hale's eyes locked onto Elias with laser focus. You think the world runs on rules and regulations and international treaties. It doesn't. It runs on power. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, the only way to stop bad actors from using that power is to match them with equal force outside the boundaries they're deliberately exploiting. Elias felt his stomach turn. This was everything he'd been trained to reject. Everything the uniform stood for: accountability, oversight, operating within clearly defined legal parameters. And yet he couldn't deny the logic, couldn't ignore the fact that Claire's intervention had saved lives while remaining completely invisible to official channels. How many operators does Section 9 have? Elias asked. 43 active, another 67 in reserve or specialized roles, each one recruited from military, intelligence, or law enforcement backgrounds. Each one vetted through a process that makes top-secret clearance look like a driver's license test. Hale swiped to a personnel file. Elias's file. You've been on our watch list for 3 years, Captain. Ever since you made a tactical call during a hostage situation in Syria that saved 11 lives but violated about 15 different protocols. Elias remembered. A warehouse full of civilians, hostile forces closing in, and a decision that had involved shooting through a wall based on thermal imaging and prayer. The official report had called it reckless. His commanding officer had called it brilliant. The families of the 11 people who lived had called it miraculous. Claire recommended you personally, Hale continued. Said you had the instincts and the moral flexibility to operate at our level. That's high praise. She doesn't recommend people lightly. Where is she? On assignment. Won't be back for 3 weeks, minimum. You'll see her during advanced training if you make it that far. If? Recruitment is the easy part. Surviving the selection process is harder. Out of every 10 candidates we bring in, maybe 2 make it through the full pipeline. The rest wash out, get reassigned to conventional units with carefully scrubbed memories, or decide this life isn't for them and disappear into civilian careers with ND. As that would make your head spin. The helicopter began descending. Through the window, Elias saw a valley carved between mountain peaks, pristine, isolated, completely invisible from aerial surveillance. Buildings dotted the valley floor, configured like a small military base, but with none of the identifying markers that would flag it as government property. Welcome to Site 17, Hale said as the helicopter touched down. You're home for the next 6 months. If you survive training, you'll deploy as a full operator. If you don't, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what could have been. They stepped out into mountain air so clean it almost hurt to breathe. Personnel moved between buildings with purpose, their faces carrying the same hard-earned exhaustion Elias had seen in every special operations unit he'd ever worked with. But there was something else here too. Something in the way they moved, the way they communicated through glances and minimal words. These people operated on a different frequency than normal humans. Hale led him to a nondescript building on the compound's eastern edge. Inside was a conference room that looked like every military briefing space Elias had ever seen, except for the biometric locks on the door and the electromagnetic shielding that made his phone completely useless. Sit, Hale said, gesturing to a chair. Elias sat. 2 other figures entered the room, a woman in her 40s with the bearing of someone who'd seen combat and survived, and a younger man whose eyes carried the cold analytical precision of an intelligence analyst. This is Colonel Reeves, Hale said, nodding to the woman. She runs tactical operations. And this is Dr. Chen, our Chief of Psychological Operations and Candidate Assessment. Reeves studied Elias with the intensity of a surgeon examining a patient. You understand what you're volunteering for? Not completely, but enough to know it's necessary. Wrong answer, Dr. Chen said, his voice carrying a slight accent. You should understand almost nothing, should be operating on instinct and faith rather than knowledge. The fact that you think you understand tells me you're either arrogant or naive. Elias bristled. I've spent 15 years in uniform. I know how operations work. You know how conventional operations work, Reeves corrected. What we do here is different, fundamentally different. The missions, the methods, the moral calculations, all of it exists outside the framework you've spent your career operating within. Then teach me. We will. But first we need to break you. Reeves leaned forward. Section 9 operators don't have the luxury of following orders and trusting the chain of command. You'll be dropped into situations with incomplete intelligence, impossible timelines, and objectives that change mid-operation. You'll have to make calls that could save hundreds or kill thousands, and you'll have to live with those calls for the rest of your life, which, if you're good, will be significantly shorter than it would be in conventional service. How short are we talking? Average operational lifespan is 7 years, Dr. Chen said clinically. Some operators burn out sooner. A few last longer. Claire Mercer has been active for 11 years, which makes her an outlier. Also makes her one of our most valuable assets. 11 years. Elias tried to imagine carrying the weight of 74 kills across 11 years of shadow operations and impossible shots. Tried to imagine the toll it would take, the way it would reshape someone's psychology and perception until they became something other than fully human. What's the washout rate in training? Elias asked. 80%, Hale said. Most candidates can't handle the psychological stress, can't make peace with operating outside legal boundaries, can't accept that sometimes the right call means watching innocent people die because saving them would compromise a larger objective. And you're okay with that? With sacrificing innocence? No, but I'm okay with making hard calls in impossible situations. Hale's expression hardened. You want moral absolutes? Join a philosophy department? You want to actually make a difference in a world that doesn't care about your ethical comfort? Stay here and learn what it takes to operate at our level. The room fell silent. Elias felt the weight of 3 sets of eyes measuring him, calculating his worth, deciding whether he had what it took to survive in their world. I'm in, he said finally. Whatever it takes. I'm in. Reeves nodded. Good. Training starts tomorrow at 0500. You'll undergo 6 months of intensive preparation covering advanced marksmanship, tradecraft, psychological conditioning, and field operations. You'll learn languages, demolitions, infiltration techniques, and how to operate in hostile territory with zero support. You'll be pushed to your absolute limits and beyond. Many times you'll want to quit. Don't. What happens if I do? You go home, or what's left of it. Dr. Chen pulled up a file on the wall monitor. We have a comprehensive reintegration program for washouts, memory modification through pharmaceutical and psychological intervention, placement in civilian careers with manufactured backgrounds, ongoing monitoring to ensure operational security. You'll live a normal life. You just won't remember any of this. Elias felt ice spread through his chest. You erase people's memories? We protect operational security through whatever means necessary, Hale said. Section 9's existence is classified above top secret. No one who learns about us can be allowed to compromise that security, whether through intention or accident. So yes, if you wash out, we scrub your memories of this place and everything connected to it. You'll remember serving at Black Ridge, taking emergency leave, and eventually transitioning to civilian life. Clean, simple, safe. That's a violation of everything you've ever been taught, I know. Hale's expression softened slightly. But it's also the only way this works. The only way we can operate with the freedom necessary to actually accomplish our mission. You don't have to like it. You just have to accept it. Elias looked at each of them in turn. Hale with his brutal honesty, Reeves with her combat-hardened certainty, Dr. Chen with his clinical detachment. These people had made peace with operating in moral gray zones that would destroy most humans, had learned to carry the weight of impossible choices without breaking. Could he become that? Could he sacrifice his ethics, his sense of right and wrong, everything he'd built his identity around, for the sake of missions that might never be acknowledged? He thought about Claire, about the lives she'd saved and the toll it had taken, about the loneliness in her eyes and the certainty in her voice when she talked about necessity. He thought about Emma, about the world he wanted her to inherit, and about whether being her distant hero was better than being her present failure. I understand, Elias said quietly, and I accept. Then welcome to Section 9, Hale said, extending his hand. Your old life ends now. What comes next is up to you. Elias shook his hand, feeling the finality of it settle over him like a burial shroud. Everything he'd been, Captain Elias Kane, Army Ranger, father, soldier, disappeared in that moment, replaced by something new, something undefined, something that would be forged in the crucible of impossible missions and moral compromises. They spent the next 4 hours in that conference room, walking through operational histories that made Elias's blood run cold, assassinations that prevented terrorist attacks, extractions that saved hostages while leaving entire enemy compounds burning, sabotage operations that collapsed criminal networks and rogue state programs before they could threaten American interests. Every operation existed outside official channels. Every result was attributed to luck or intelligence work or conventional military success, and every operator who made it possible remained invisible, their names scrubbed from history, their sacrifices known only to the handful of people in rooms like this one. You'll start with physical conditioning, Reeves explained as they walked through the compound after the briefing. Then move into advanced marksmanship, tactical driving, close quarters combat. After that comes the psychological prep, learning to operate under stress, making calls in impossible situations, dealing with the aftermath of choices that would break normal people. How do you know I won't break? We don't. That's what the training determines. She stopped outside a barracks building. This is yours, Bunk 7. Your gear is already inside. Tomorrow morning, you join Red Cell, the current training cohort. 8 candidates started 3 weeks ago. 5 remain. By the end of the month, maybe 2 will be left. Maybe none. What happened to the other 3? 2 washed out voluntarily. Couldn't handle the stress. 1 is in medical after a training accident that nearly killed him. Reeves's expression didn't change. We don't coddle candidates. We simulate real operational stress, real danger, real consequences. If you can't handle it in training, you'll die in the field. So we push hard, break you down, build you back up into something that can actually survive out there. Elias entered the barracks and found a space that was simultaneously familiar and alien. Military standard bunks, footlockers, personal areas marked with tape on the floor. But the people occupying those spaces moved with a precision and intensity that went beyond normal military bearing. These were operators in the making, honed, focused, operating on the edge of their capabilities. A woman looked up from cleaning her rifle as Elias entered. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, eyes that had seen combat and come out harder for it. You the new guy? She asked. Elias. Sergeant Nina Ortiz. Or just Ortiz. Ranks don't mean much here. She set down the cleaning rod. You come from conventional units? Army. Ranger qualified, 15 years in. Then you're going to hate the next 6 months. Everything you learned about chain of command and proper procedure? Worthless. Everything you think you know about operating in the field? Wrong. This place strips you down to raw instinct and builds you back up into something that can function in situations where there are no right answers. Looking forward to it, Ortiz allowed herself a thin smile. You'll fit in, or you'll break. Either way, welcome to hell. The other candidates introduced themselves over the next hour. Jackson, a former Navy SEAL with demolitions expertise. Pryor, CIA field operative who'd spent 6 years running assets in hostile territory. Kim, Marine Scout sniper with a confirmed kill record that rivaled Claire's early career. Each one brought skills honed through years of elite service. Each one carried the weight of experiences that had prepared them for exactly this kind of recruitment, and each one looked at Elias with the same question in their eyes. Would he make it, or would he wash out like so many before him? Elias lay in his bunk that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of a compound that never truly slept. Somewhere in the darkness, operators were planning missions. Analysts were processing intelligence. Support personnel were maintaining the infrastructure that kept Section 9 operational. And somewhere out there beyond these mountains and these secrets, Claire Mercer was making another impossible shot. Saving lives no one would ever thank her for. Carrying weight no one would ever acknowledge. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine himself doing the same. Tried to picture a future where he was the ghost in the night, the answer to prayers that couldn't be spoken, the miracle, that officially never happened. It terrified him. But it also felt right in a way nothing else ever had. Tomorrow, the transformation would begin. Tomorrow, Captain Elias Kane would start dying so that something new could be born in his place. And somewhere in the darkness, he heard Claire's voice again. Forget you ever saw me. But he couldn't. Because she'd shown him a truth that couldn't be unseen, a world that couldn't be ignored, a calling that demanded more than comfort or safety or the luxury of moral certainty. She'd shown him what it meant to be necessary, and now he would learn what it cost. The alarm shattered darkness at 4:45, 15 minutes before official wake-up. Elias was already awake, had been for hours, his mind refusing to shut down despite exhaustion that went bone deep. Around him, the other candidates stirred with the practiced efficiency of people used to operating on minimal sleep and maximum stress. Move, Ortiz said, already pulling on boots. First one to the range gets coffee. Last one runs the obstacle course twice. Elias moved. The next 6 months became a blur of controlled violence and psychological warfare. Physical training that pushed him past every limit he thought he had. Marksmanship drills where missing by a millimeter meant starting over. Close quarters combat scenarios where hesitation meant simulated death. And through it all, the constant pressure of knowing that 80% of the people who started this journey would fail. By week 3, Jackson washed out. The demolitions expert couldn't handle the moral ambiguity exercises. Simulations where saving one target meant sacrificing another, where the right call was always the one that hurt most. He left quietly one morning, and by afternoon, it was like he'd never existed. Week 7 took prior. The former CIA operative suffered a complete psychological break during a 72-hour isolation exercise designed to simulate capture and interrogation. Elias heard him screaming through the walls, begging for it to stop, and felt his own sanity fray at the edges. Kim lasted until week 11. The Marine sniper was physically perfect, tactically brilliant, but couldn't make the transition from surgical precision to operational flexibility. She needed clear targets, clean shots, defined parameters. Section 9 operated in chaos. The morning she packed her gear, she found Elias cleaning his rifle in the pre-dawn darkness. "You're going to make it," she said quietly. "You have what they're looking for." "What's that?" "The ability to live with yourself after you become something else." Kim shouldered her pack. "Don't lose that. It's the only thing that keeps you human." Then she was gone, and only Elias and Ortiz remained from Red Cell's original cohort. 2 out of 8, Ortiz said that night as they ran night navigation drills through mountain terrain that wanted to kill them. "Better odds than most cycles." "You sound disappointed." "I am. Means the training is getting soft." She vaulted over a fallen log without breaking stride. 10 years ago, they had cycles where nobody made it through. The program was harder, the standards were higher, the psychological screening was brutal. What changed? Operational tempo increased. We're running more missions with fewer operators. Command had to ease the selection criteria or risk not having enough bodies to deploy. Ortiz glanced at him in the moonlight. "But between you and me, I'd rather have 5 operators who are perfect than 20 who are just good enough." They ran in silence for another mile before Elias asked the question that had been eating at him since week 1. "Have you seen her, Claire?" Ortiz's pace didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. "Once, 3 months ago, between deployments. She was different than I expected." "How?" "Quieter, more tired, like she was carrying weight nobody else could see." Ortiz jumped across a stream, landing perfectly on the far bank. But when she was on the range, when she had a rifle in her hands, she became something else. Something beyond human. I watched her make a shot at 2,800 meters in 15-knot crosswinds. First round, center mass. The instructor stopped talking, stopped breathing. Just watch this woman do something that shouldn't be possible. "Did you talk to her?" "For about 30 seconds. She asked how training was going, told me not to die, then disappeared back into whatever operation she was running." Ortiz's voice carried a note of something that might have been awe or fear. That's when I understood. People like Claire aren't operators. They're instruments. Tools that the universe created for a specific purpose and then pointed at problems nobody else can solve. Week 14 brought the first live mission, a simulated hostage rescue that turned out to be real intelligence work on a human trafficking network operating across the Mexican border. Elias and Ortiz were embedded with actual operators, tasked with gathering evidence while maintaining cover as freelance security consultants. The operation went sideways on day 3 when their cover was blown by a corrupt local official. Elias found himself in a hotel room facing 2 armed traffickers who'd been sent to eliminate the problem. No backup, no extraction plan. Just him, Ortiz, and the choice between compromising the mission or taking action that would cross every legal line he'd ever been trained to respect. Ortiz looked at him across the room, her hand near her concealed weapon, and asked the question with her eyes. "What's the call?" Elias made it. 2 shots, both fatal, both necessary. They dumped the bodies in a construction site, scrubbed the scene, and completed the mission. The intelligence they gathered led to the arrest of 17 traffickers and the rescue of 43 victims across 3 states. Nobody ever knew about the 2 men who died in that hotel room. Official reports credited an anonymous tip. The families of the rescued victims praised law enforcement. And Elias learned what it felt like to kill outside the rules of engagement, outside the protective structure of military authority, outside everything that made killing legal and sanctioned. It felt like drowning in cold water. But it also felt necessary. Week 20 brought advanced psychological conditioning, exercises designed to break down moral absolutes and rebuild them as operational flexibility. Elias was placed in scenario after scenario where the right choice meant watching innocents die, where saving one life meant condemning others, where hesitation killed everyone. Dr. Chen monitored every session, taking notes with clinical detachment while Elias made impossible calls and lived with the simulated consequences. "You're struggling with the trolley problem," Dr. Chen observed during a debrief. "The classic ethical dilemma. Do you pull the lever to save 5 people but kill 1, or do nothing and let the 5 die? I know the problem. I just don't accept that it's the only framework. Because you still believe in right answers, in solutions that don't require sacrifice." Dr. Chen pulled up neural scans showing Elias's brain activity during decision-making exercises. But look at this. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for moral reasoning, is rewiring, forming new pathways, learning to operate outside binary ethical frameworks. You're saying I'm losing my conscience. I'm saying you're developing operational flexibility, the ability to make hard calls without freezing, without the paralysis that gets people killed in the field. Dr. Chen leaned forward. Section 9 doesn't need operators with perfect morals. We need operators who can function in moral ambiguity and still accomplish the mission. You're learning that faster than most. Week 24 brought Claire back to Site 17. Elias saw her across the compound during morning PT, and for a moment he thought he'd imagined it. But there she was, auburn hair pulled back, same ivory blouse rolled at the sleeves, moving between buildings like she owned the very air. She looked thinner than he remembered, more worn, like the last 3 months had aged her in ways that had nothing to do with time. Their eyes met across the distance. She nodded once, a bare acknowledgement, then disappeared into a building Elias didn't have clearance to enter. He didn't see her again until week 25, when she showed up on the long-range rifle course during qualification testing. Elias was attempting a shot at 3,000 meters, an impossible distance, even with perfect conditions. The instructors had told him not to expect success, just to learn the fundamentals, understand the physics, except that some targets were beyond conventional capability. Claire walked onto the range without announcement, picked up a Barrett M107A1, and made the shot on her first attempt. The target indicator pinged, center mass, perfect kill. The instructors went silent. Elias felt his world tilt. He'd spent months training, had access to the best equipment and instruction available, and couldn't come close to what Claire had just done casually, without preparation, like it was the most natural thing in the world. She set down the rifle and walked over to where Elias stood. "You're pulling left," she said quietly, anticipating the recoil instead of letting it happen. "Your breathing is controlled, but your heartbeat is spiking at the moment of trigger pull. That's throwing your consistency." "How do you—" "Because I made the same mistakes, for years, until I learned to stop fighting the shot and become part of it." Claire picked up his rifle, made a series of micro-adjustments to the scope and bipod that Elias couldn't even track. Try again. This time, don't think, just feel. Elias settled into position, controlled his breathing, found the target through the scope, a silhouette barely visible at 3,000 meters. He felt his heartbeat, steady and strong, felt the wind against his face, felt the weight of the rifle, the curve of the trigger, the moment of perfect stillness before the shot. He stopped thinking and pulled the trigger. The round flew true. 3 seconds later, the target indicator pinged, not center mass, but a hit. A confirmed kill at a distance he'd thought impossible. Claire smiled. A real smile, the first he'd seen from her. Better. Do it 10,000 more times and you'll start to understand. Is that how many it took you? More. She looked out at the distant target, her expression shifting to something distant and haunted. I fired over 50,000 rounds at extreme range, practiced until my shoulder was bruised black, until I could smell gunpowder in my sleep, until I could calculate windage and elevation in my head faster than computers. And I'm still learning, still finding ways to push further. Why? Because there's always a target just beyond your current limit. Always someone who needs saving at a distance nobody else can reach. Claire turned to him, and for the first time, Elias saw the full cost written across her face. You asked me once if the weight of my work ever follows me. The answer is every day. Every shot. Every face I see through the scope before I pull the trigger. They're with me. Always. Forever. How do you live with it? I don't. I just exist. Move forward. Take the next shot. Save the next life. Because stopping means accepting that all those ghosts died for nothing. She picked up her rifle case. You'll understand soon enough. Once you take your first shot in the field, once you see someone die by your hand in the name of operational necessity, you'll join the club, the ones who can never go back to normal, who carry death like a second skin. Does it get easier? Claire was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. No. But you get stronger, strong enough to carry it, strong enough to take the next shot. That's all that matters. She walked away, leaving Elias alone on the range with the echo of impossible shots and the weight of futures he couldn't yet imagine. Week 26 brought final evaluations. Elias and Ortiz were dropped into a simulated hostile environment with zero support and tasked with completing an objective that required infiltration, intelligence gathering, and extraction without being detected. The scenario was designed to be nearly impossible. Multiple guard rotations, overlapping sensor coverage, time pressure that forced mistakes. Ortiz took point on tactical planning. Elias handled technical bypass and real-time adaptation. They moved through the exercise like smoke, avoiding detection, gathering intelligence, completing the objective with 11 minutes to spare. Director Hale was waiting when they exited the simulation. You both passed, he said without preamble. Final scores put you in the top 15% of all candidates who've completed the program. You're cleared for active deployment. Ortiz grinned, the first genuine emotion Elias had seen from her in months. When do we deploy? Ortiz, you're assigned to a field team running operations in West Africa. Threat elimination and asset recovery. You leave in 72 hours. Hale turned to Elias. You're staying here for specialized training. The bottom dropped out of Elias's stomach. Why? Because you have aptitude for long-range precision work that we can't waste on standard field operations. Claire requested you personally for advanced sniper training, said you have the temperament for extreme distance shooting. Hale's expression was unreadable. Congratulations! You're being groomed to become one of our long-range assets, maybe even Claire's eventual replacement. Ortiz clapped him on the shoulder. Lucky bastard. Most operators would kill for that assignment, but Elias felt only cold dread. Replacement. That meant Claire was expendable, that eventually her operational lifespan would end through death, burnout, or psychological collapse, and someone needed to be ready to step into that role. Someone who could carry the weight of impossible shots and 74 kills and the loneliness of being a ghost who saved the world one bullet at a time. That someone was apparently him. The next 3 months were the hardest of Elias's life. Claire trained him personally, pushing him through exercises that bordered on torture. 10-hour days on the range, shooting until his shoulder was bruised and his hands shook. ballistic calculations that filled his dreams, wind reading that required him to feel atmospheric changes in his bones. And through it all, Claire's relentless standards, her refusal to accept anything less than perfect. Again, she said after Elias missed a shot at 3,200 meters by 6 inches. You're compensating for wind at the wrong altitude layer. The bullet transits through 3 distinct atmospheric zones on a shot this long. You can't just calculate surface conditions. I'm using the formula you gave me. Formulas are starting points. Real shooting requires intuition. Feel. She pointed at the sky. Tell me what the wind is doing at 500 meters altitude. Elias stared at her. How the hell am I supposed to… Feel it. Stop thinking and feel it. He closed his eyes, focused on the air against his skin, the way trees moved in the distance, the subtle temperature gradients he'd learned to sense. And somehow, impossibly, he felt it. A crosswind at altitude, moving faster than surface conditions suggested. 8 knots. Right to left, he said. 7.4. You're learning. Claire made a note in her tablet. Do it again, and again, until you can read wind in your sleep. They trained through weather that should have shut down the range, through rain and snow and heat that made the air shimmer, through conditions that most snipers would consider impossible. And slowly, painfully, Elias began to understand what Claire had meant about becoming the shot rather than taking it. His body learned to compensate for factors his mind couldn't calculate. His breathing synchronized with wind patterns. His heartbeat steadied into a rhythm that existed outside conscious control. And the shots that had seemed impossible 6 months ago became difficult, then achievable, then routine. On his final qualification day, Claire set up a target at 3,400 meters, further than any shot she'd ever asked him to attempt. Make this, she said, and you graduate. Miss, and we spend another month drilling fundamentals. Elias settled into position, read the wind, the temperature, the atmospheric pressure, calculated elevation and windage through formulas that had become second nature. Then he stopped calculating and just felt, became part of the rifle, part of the bullet, part of the arc that would carry his shot across 2 miles of mountain air to a target he could barely see. He pulled the trigger. 4 seconds later, an eternity, the target indicator pinged, center mass. Claire didn't smile, didn't congratulate him, just nodded once and said, "Welcome to the club. Now you understand what it costs." That night she found him in the compound's observation tower, staring out at mountains painted silver by moonlight. "You'll deploy next week," Claire said, settling beside him. "Target is a warlord in Somalia who's been using child soldiers. Conventional extraction isn't possible. The shot is 3,100 meters across urban terrain with multiple environmental variables. It'll be your first field kill." Elias felt his stomach tighten. "Am I ready?" "No. Nobody's ready for their first kill. But you're capable. That's all that matters." Claire was quiet for a moment. "It'll change you. Taking a life outside combat, outside the heat of engagement, it's different. Colder. More deliberate. You'll see their face through the scope. See them living their last moment before you decide it's over, and then you'll carry that forever." "How do you do it? How do you keep taking shots knowing what it costs?" "Because the alternative costs more." Claire's voice carried the weight of 74 decisions, 74 ghosts, 74 moments of choosing necessity over comfort. That warlord in Somalia? He's recruited 300 children, turned them into killers, brutalized entire villages. Conventional forces can't touch him because of political complications and diplomatic sensitivities, so he keeps operating, keeps destroying lives, until someone like me, or you, makes the shot that officially never happened. And that's justice? That's necessity. Justice is a luxury for people who don't have to make impossible choices. Claire stood, preparing to leave. "You'll understand after your first mission, after you see the intelligence reports about what happens because you pulled that trigger. The children who get rescued, the villages that survive, the lives that continue because you ended one. Does it balance? The math of it?" Claire looked at him with eyes that had seen things he couldn't imagine. "No, it never balances. You just learn to carry the debt and keep moving forward." She left him alone with the mountains and the moonlight and the knowledge that in 1 week he would become what she was, a necessary ghost, an invisible killer, a person who saved the world through impossible shots and invisible sacrifices. The Somalia operation went exactly as planned. Elias made the shot, 3,100 meters, urban environment, target walking along a rooftop at dusk. One round, center mass, instant death. He extracted before anyone even knew the warlord was gone. 3 weeks later, intelligence confirmed the rescue of 217 child soldiers and the collapse of the warlord's entire operation. Villages that had lived in terror for years celebrated liberation. Families were reunited, lives were saved. And Elias Kane, or whatever remained of the man who'd been Elias Kane, carried the ghost of a face seen through a scope in the moment before death. Claire was right. It changed everything. 5 years passed. Elias became one of Section 9's most reliable long-range assets, with 47 confirmed eliminations across 12 countries. Each one was necessary. Each one saved lives. Each one added another ghost to the collection he carried. He saw Claire occasionally between deployments. She looked older each time, not in years, but in weight. The burden she carried was crushing her slowly, turning her into something that existed more as instrument than person. "How many now?" Elias asked during one of their rare conversations.
118. Claire's voice was flat, empty. I stopped seeing faces around number 90. Now they're just problems, targets, necessary eliminations. That's not healthy. Healthy isn't the mission. Effective is. She cleaned her rifle with mechanical precision, her movements robotic. I've saved thousands of lives, Kane, maybe tens of thousands. The math says I'm doing the right thing, but the math doesn't account for what it takes from you, what you lose every time you pull that trigger. Then stop, retire. Let someone else carry it. Claire laughed, a hollow, broken sound. There is no retirement, not really. You know that. You either die in the field or you live long enough to become so broken you can't function, and then they memory wipe you and send you back to civilian life as someone who never existed. Either way, the person you were is gone. Elias wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she could still save herself, still find a way back to something resembling normal, but he knew she was right. He could feel it happening to himself, the slow erosion of the person he'd been, replaced by something colder and more efficient and less human. Year 7 brought the mission that would define everything. A terrorist cell had acquired a biological weapon capable of killing millions. Intelligence put the weapon in a compound in Yemen, surrounded by civilians being used as human shields. Conventional military action would cause massive casualties. Drone strikes would trigger international incidents. Section 9's solution was surgical. Eliminate the cell's leadership through long-range precision fire, creating chaos that would allow a small team to secure the weapon. The shot was 4,100 meters, the longest distance anyone in Section 9 had ever attempted in field conditions. Claire took the assignment. Elias was her spotter. They set up on a ridgeline in the pre-dawn darkness, calculating angles and distances and atmospheric conditions that changed by the minute. The target would appear at sunrise, a small window, less than 30 seconds, where the cell leader would be exposed on a compound rooftop. "Wind is shifting," Elias reported, reading instruments and intuition in equal measure. 4.2 knots, quartering from the east, pressure dropping, temperature rising with the sun. Claire made micro-adjustments to her rifle, her hands moving with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "Call it when you see him." They waited. Minutes stretched into eternity. The sun crept over distant mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and blood. "Target acquired," Elias said, seeing movement through his spotting scope. "Rooftop, northeast corner. Walking pattern suggests he'll be exposed for approximately 20 seconds. Wind? Steady, 4 knots. Adjust 0.7 mils right." Claire made the correction, settled into her shooting position, controlled her breathing until it was barely perceptible, and waited for the moment of perfect stillness that existed between heartbeats. Elias watched through the scope as the target moved into position, saw his face clearly, a man in his 40s, bearded, wearing traditional robes. Saw him pause to look at the sunrise, unaware that death was looking back from 4,000 meters away. "Send it," Elias whispered. Claire pulled the trigger. The shot was perfection. The round flew true across impossible distance, transiting through atmospheric zones and wind layers,
and the mathematical chaos that should have made accuracy impossible. 4.7 seconds of flight time, nearly 3 miles of empty air. The target collapsed. Through the scope, Elias saw the moment of impact, the sudden transition from living to dead, the final instant before everything changed. Confirmed kill, he reported. Extraction team is moving. They broke down their position and disappeared into the desert as the sun rose fully, painting the world in light that couldn't touch the shadows they operated in. The biological weapon was secured. The terrorist cell collapsed. Millions of lives were saved. And Claire Mercer, 119 confirmed eliminations, 11 years of impossible shots, enough ghosts to populate a small city, finally broke. Elias found her that night, sitting alone in a safe house, staring at her hands like she'd never seen them before. "I can't feel them anymore," she said quietly. "The shots, the faces, the weight. It's all just nothing. Like I died somewhere along the way and forgot to stop moving. You saved millions today. Did I? Or did I just delay the inevitable? Because there's always another threat, another target, another impossible shot that only I can make. And eventually, I'll miss, or hesitate, or break so completely that I put a round in the wrong target and kill innocent people because I can't tell the difference anymore between necessary and wrong." Elias sat beside her, understanding exactly what she meant because he felt it happening to himself. The slow erosion, the loss of certainty, the moment when you looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back. "What do we do?" he asked. "We stop? Before we become monsters instead of necessary evils?" Claire looked at him with eyes that had seen too much and felt too little. "I'm done, Kane. I'm requesting extraction from active operations, memory wipe, civilian reintegration, whatever it takes to stop being this and become something human again." "You sure?" "No, but I'm certain I can't keep doing this. Can't keep pulling triggers and telling myself it's for the greater good. Can't keep carrying ghosts I don't even feel anymore." She stood, moving toward the door. "You should consider it too. Before you reach 119, before you stop feeling anything at all." 3 months later, Claire Mercer disappeared from Section 9's operational roster. Officially, she was reassigned to administrative roles. Unofficially, she underwent the reintegration process: pharmaceutical memory modification, psychological conditioning, placement in a civilian career that had nothing to do with rifles or impossible shots, or the weight of 119 lives ended in the name of necessity. Elias visited her once, after the process was complete. She was working as a consultant for an architectural firm, living in a quiet suburb, building a life that looked normal and peaceful and utterly empty of the weight she'd carried for 11 years. She didn't recognize him, didn't remember anything about Section 9 or long-range shots or the night they'd met in a weapons bay at Black Ridge, just smiled politely and said she didn't think they'd met before. It was both a mercy and a tragedy. Elias returned to Site 17 and continued operating for another 2 years, accumulating ghosts and impossible shots, and the slow erosion of everything that made him human. He became Section 9's premier long-range asset, the person they called when conventional options had failed and only extreme distance could solve the problem. And then one morning he woke up and couldn't remember why any of it mattered. The faces through the scope had become formulas, the weight had become numbness, the necessity had become routine. He was becoming what Claire had been before she broke, an instrument of precision violence, operating on autopilot, existing more as function than person. That day, Elias Kane walked into Director Hale's office and requested extraction from active operations. "You're our best operator," Hale said, not bothering to hide his disappointment. 73 confirmed eliminations, 0 misses, success rate that rivals Claire in her prime. "We need you. You need a rifle, a tool, something that pulls triggers without feeling the cost." Elias set his service weapon on the desk. "I'm done being that. I want out. Complete memory wipe, civilian reintegration, whatever process you used on Claire. You understand what you're giving up, the purpose, the impact? I understand I'm becoming something I don't recognize, something that makes impossible shots without feeling anything. And if I keep going, I'll end up worse than Claire, operating past the point where I can tell right from wrong, necessary from monstrous." Elias met Hale's eyes. I'd rather forget everything and live as nobody than continue existing as this. Hale was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Approved. Report to medical tomorrow morning. The process takes 3 weeks. After that, you'll be someone new. Someone who never heard of Section 9 or impossible shots or the weight of 73 ghosts. Good. That's exactly what I want. The reintegration process was both painful and liberating. Pharmaceutical intervention that rewired neural pathways, removing memories while preserving core personality traits. Psychological conditioning that rebuilt identity from scratch, creating a civilian background that felt real and complete. And finally, placement in a normal life that had nothing to do with rifles or shadows or the weight of necessary evils. 3 weeks later, Elias Kane ceased to exist. In his place was a man named Michael Cross, a military veteran who'd served with distinction before transitioning to civilian work as a security consultant. He had no memory of Section 9, no memory of Claire Mercer, no memory of 73 lives ended at impossible distances. He just remembered service, transition, and the hope of building something normal. Michael Cross built that normal life. Married, had 2 children, worked a job that paid well but demanded nothing beyond competence. And occasionally, very occasionally, he'd wake from dreams he couldn't quite remember, feeling the weight of something important he'd lost. But those moments passed. Life moved forward, and the ghost stayed buried. Somewhere in the Nevada desert, in a facility that didn't exist on any map, new operators trained for impossible shots and necessary evils. They learned to read wind at 500 meters altitude. They learned to calculate ballistic trajectories that shouldn't work. They learned to carry the weight of faces seen through scopes in the moment before death. And somewhere in the files that no one was cleared to see, 2 names sat side by side in the hall of operators who'd served with distinction before choosing peace over purpose. Claire Mercer, 119 confirmed eliminations, 11 years active service, status, retired/reintegrated. Elias Kane, 73 confirmed eliminations, 9 years active service. Status, retired/reintegrated. They'd paid the price, carried the weight, made the impossible shots that saved thousands while destroying themselves piece by piece. And in the end, they'd chosen to forget rather than continue becoming something inhuman. It was the bravest decision either of them had ever made. The world continued turning, safer for their sacrifices, ignorant of the ghosts who'd protected it from shadows. New operators took their places. New, impossible shots were made. New lives were saved by people who officially didn't exist. And somewhere in quiet suburbs, far from battlefields and weapons bays and the weight of necessity, 2 people who didn't remember being heroes lived normal lives and dreamed of things they'd never quite understand. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't in taking the impossible shot. It's in choosing to put down the rifle and walk away before you lose yourself completely, and trusting that someone else will carry the weight you can no longer bear. Well, some heroes save the world through impossible acts of courage. Others save themselves by knowing when to stop. And both choices matter more than the world will ever know.